Good evening, everyone. My name is John Quarstein. I am the Director Emeritus of the USS Monitor Center at the Mariners Museum and Park in Newport News, Virginia. And of course, the museum has the turret of the Monitor, which we are conserving, the engine, and all sorts of other fascinating objects. And so, as director of the Monitor Center, I've written several books about the Battle of Hampton Roads and the Virginia, and of course, the Monitor. And one book is The Monitor Boys, in which this story is basically coming from. So, I'm going to start with my story beginning on Christmas Day. In fact, on December 25th, the crew was amazed at everything that was going on in Hampton Roads. In fact, several ships like the Colorado and Fort Monroe were firing their guns in celebration. So a deep mist was over the harbor. And then, of course, there were the dinners on board. Actually, William Keeler, the acting assistant paymaster of the Monitor, actually went to three different places, the Kimberly Hotel, uh, onto Fort Monroe's general officers' quarters, and then he was invited on several ships. He then came back on the Monitor, and he said all he could eat was a couple of nuts. So everyone thought the Monitor was tremendous. Keeler said, "Oh, I just want us to regain greater laurels." Well, on Christmas Day, fireman, first fireman, a man known as George Gear, said that he didn't really enjoy the day, and he had paid $1 to get a special meal done by the cook for them, and he said it was the worst meal he ever had. Whereas Jacob Nicholas, who had just joined the Monitor's crew in November, said we had chicken stew and then stuffed turkey, mashed potatoes, and soft bread. After this, we had plum pudding and some nice fruit cake with apples for dessert. It was a wonderful meal. I'm fat as a hog. Oh my gosh. And so I never knew fruitcake was good, but that's just me. So unfortunately, on Christmas Day, the commander of the Monitor, John Pine Bankhead, he's going to be the sixth commander of the ironclad. He will receive orders to proceed to Beaufort, North Carolina. Now, Gideon Wells, Secretary of the Navy for the Union, had wanted to strike at Wilmington, North Carolina, because that was a big blockade runner's haven, and it grew in importance during the war. The trouble is, the inlets going into the Cape Fear River are very shallow. But he has this concept. He wants to send a bunch of monitors down to Beaufort and then go further down the coast to Wilmington, North Carolina, go through, so there are two inlets into the Cape Fear River, go through the old inlet and then fire upon Fort Caswell and of course Fort Fisher from the rear, and then go right up and capture Wilmington. Well, the trouble was the new class of ironclads that were being built and finally being commissioned and sent south is known as the Passaic class, and it had a draft of over 11 feet. Now, the old inlet is 10.6 inches deep at high tide, and so only the Monitor could have gone over that. So the concept, the invasion, was bad from the very beginning. But nevertheless, they needed to send those ironclads south for other operations against ports like Charleston, which will happen in 1863. Nevertheless, he sent this message to John Pine Bankhead. Bankhead tells the crew on Christmas Day, in other words, they celebrate, and all of a sudden, oh my gosh, we have to go back to sea. As executive officer, Lieutenant Samuel Dana Green warned, I do not consider this steamer a sea-going vessel. She has not the steam power to go against a headwind or sea. N. would not steer even in smooth weather. And going so slow, she does not mind her helm readily. Oh my goodness. So when the orders come, uh, Dr. Grenville Weeks, the new surgeon on board the Monitor, said every member of the crew was running around sealing, caulking everything, some things with red putty, so that they wanted to secure against any water coming into the Monitor as she went south. Um, the trouble is, they jacked up it out of its ring and then placed caulking covered by red putty over top. George Gear said it was very, very difficult to do. However, they thought they had sealed the Monitor correctly. John Erickson will later tell everyone, and he's already told them once, that if you left the turret in its ring, it would not leak. So, you have possibilities of leaks coming from the water coming over top the turret because it had a graded roof, and then also forcing its way through the sight holes in the pilot house, and some other areas like the anchor well. And so it's not a tight ship, let's put it that way. And the technology in 1862 really made it difficult to make these hatches and so forth completely secure. So Grenville Weeks says the turret and side holes were caulked and every possible entrance for water made secure, only the smallest opening being left in the top turret. Okay, so now the Monitor cannot go on its own south. She only made 7 knots. Remember, she has an 18-inch freeboard. And so, just like how she came down from New York, she's going to be towed by a very powerful steamer, 236 feet in length, known as the USS Rhode Island. It's a paddler, and it's going to be commanded by one of the most famous rescue at sea officers in the U.S. Navy, Commander Stephen Decatur Trenchard. In fact, Trenchard, for saving the crew of the British bark Adele off of Cape May, Massachusetts, he will receive a gold sword from Queen Victoria of Great Britain. In fact, he had to go to Congress and say, hey, can I have this? The monuments cause was still back then. So anyway, there's a storm that comes through Hampton Roads on the 27th. However, the morning of December 29 will break extremely clear. In fact, William Keeler, acting assistant paymaster, will say the sea was a smooth sea and clear skies seemed to promise a successful termination of our trip and an opportunity of once more trying our mettle against the rebel works and making the little Monitor once again a household name. Well, Jacob Nicholas actually wrote his father saying, oh, we have orders to go down to North Carolina or to go south, because he wasn't supposed to say exactly where they were going south, and we have to go around Cape Hatteras. And all the old salts worry that we'll have problems, but I think we'll be okay. So anyway, they are towed out of the Hampton Roads and head south. The first day of the trip works very nicely, the 29th. In fact, the morning was fairly calm. The Monitor was riding the waves. In fact, as William Keeler will write, this is around noon, we began to experience a swell from the southward with a slight increase of wind from the southwest. The sea was breaking over the pilot house forward and striking the base of the tower, but not with sufficient force to break over it. Found that the packing of oakum under and around the base of the tower had loosened somewhat from the working of the tower as the vessel pitched and rolled. Speed at this time was about 5 knots, ascertaining from the engineer of the watch and the bilge pumps kept her perfectly free and occasionally sucking. Now, William Gere will say that once that oakum had been moved from a slight wind and slightly heavy waves, that all the oakum had been removed and the water came down through the turret onto the berth deck. The berth deck was right below the turret. And so all the sailors that might have been sleeping at that time, they were drenched by water. And by a little after midday, the sea began to rush over the turret, or they would call it the tower, with a fearful rush, and the sea was white with foam. By 1 o'clock in the afternoon of December 30th, the Monitor and the Rhode Island will pass Hatteras Lighthouse. And as they try to make their way around the Cape itself, the storm continued to increase, but it started to, the storm wasn't that intense. So everyone thought, oh, we're going to be okay. Now, at 5 o'clock, the officers sit down to dinner, and and the storm is above them, but the ship is handling it just fine. And all of a sudden, as Keeler wrote, everyone was cheerful and happy, and though the sea was rolling and foaming over our heads, and the laugh and jest passed freely around, all rejoicing that at last our monotonous, inactive life had ended, and the gallant little Monitor would soon add fresh laurels to her name. Keeler was all about these laurels. In fact, he said when you were in Washington, and the Monitor went up there to get repairs at the Washington Navy Yard, he would walk into the Willard Hotel and he didn't have to buy a thing. Everyone said, oh, you're a member of the Monitor, huzzah, and here's drinks, here's food. Now, Keeler didn't drink. In fact, he thought drink was the curse of the Navy, but nevertheless, many of the crew, their headbands said Monitor, instantly recognized as somebody special. Nevertheless, now they're going almost in tandem with another Monitor, the Passaic, commanded by Commander John Rogers, and that ship is being towed by the state of Georgia, which is a steamer very similar to the Keystone State. There were mail packets which carried some merchandise and passengers between New York and sites like Savannah, Charleston, Norfolk. So anyway, so these ships are going kind of together. However, shortly after they finish their meal, the storm created greater velocity, and all of a sudden, the bilge pumps were unable to keep up the water. And so as the ship was being pulled by the Rhode Island has a speed of 13 knots. There are two hawse lines connecting the Monitor to the Rhode Island. And so this made for a very, it forced the Monitor to go into waves. So those waves are going to break up over them. And Captain Bankhead, found that the boat yawned excessively, towed very badly, and the increased motion, somewhat more water came in around the base. He had the bilge pumps working, but now the water was trying to almost take over, and they had two bilge pumps. They're called Worthington pumps. You can see them at the Mariners Museum. So they pull out an even more powerful pump that is a central fugal pump known by the Andrews pump. It's a powerful pump that George Gere said it could blow a stream of water as thick as a man out of the vessel. So here they have these pumps working. And let me tell you, without the pumps, they're in serious trouble, because if the water rises in the engine room, you can can imagine what might happen. So the ironclad is actually going now in very heavy weather, riding one huge wave, plunging the next, if that's shooting straight to the bottom of the ocean. Frank Butts is going to say that as the ship went up and then came down with a force, that the hull would tremble and the shock would sometimes take us off our feet. Now, let me just tell you, the Monitor is built in three parts. The turret, which sat into a ring onto the armored deck. And then you would have the hull, but the hull had an overhang to it. So every time the water smashed down, the hull and the armored deck started to be separated. Actually, they had a row of two bolts that connected the hull to the armored deck, the armored deck being heavier than the hull. So you can well imagine, some people thought the Monitor would break apart because of the force of the waves. So all of a sudden, the Worthington pumps failed to keep up. Once again, they operated the centrifugal pump, and then he basically would then Bankhead would order a bucket brigade. And then they also had added hand pumps. So working on the hand pumps, the bucket brigade made many of the crew members not upset, thinking that they're going to make it. As William Keeler would say, our brave little craft suffered long and well. Now her bow would rise on a huge billow, and before she could sink into the intervening hollow, a succeeding wave would strike her under her heavy armor with a report like a thunder and violence that threatened to tear apart her thin sheet iron bottom and the heavy armor which it supported. Now, the water was increasing rapidly. Keeler noted that all of a sudden, the men in the engine room said, the water is risen over the engine mount and putting out the fires. Now, this is at 9 o'clock. So within 4 hours of the Monitor, the officer sitting down having dinner and thinking everything's fine and laughing. Well, I want to go. The Monitor is heading straight onto the shore. Let me tell you, they describe the storm as being at probably close to 50 to 60 knots. They also noted that some of the seas were as high as 30 feet. So you can imagine the Monitor at 171 feet is going to take a rough beating. And once again, the Monitor is 9 feet at the top of the turret. So this is really very bad. And it looked like now once the engine stopped, all of a sudden the crew could hear the pumps give their last burst of steam. So the Monitor, I mean, as George Gears said, words cannot depict the agony of the moments as our little company gathered at the top of the turret, stood with a mass of sinking iron beneath them, gazing through the dim light over the raging waters and having anxiety mounting to almost agony for the evidence of succor from the only source of relief they could receive it. Bankhead had told Trenchard before they went down, I'm going to shoot off flares. I'm going to actually put up a red lantern if our ship is in distress. Trenchard said, pay attention to it. Now, once again, not only are the seas bad, the wind's bad, but it is snowing, it is sleeting, it is freezing rain. So these conditions make visibility very bad. In fact, they shot out several flares. The Rhode Island doesn't take attention. Bankhead even uses a speaking tube to shout at the Rhode Island, help, He uses a chalkboard, says help. But all of a sudden, the Rhode Island, Trenchard, noted that the Monitor was in trouble. Now, Bankhead feared that the ship, because of being towed, was going to actually be torn apart. So he will decide that he wants to cut the cables that are connecting the Monitor with the Rhode Island. So first, Gunner James Fenwick, quarter gunner is his proper title, James Fenwick, goes out to try and hack it off. However, he's swept overboard. Then boatswain's mate, John Stocking, whose actually real name was William Wentz, will take the axe and frantically chomp at the cables until all of a sudden he's picked up and thrown into the sea, never to be seen before. Then Lewis Stoddard goes out. He's acting master mate, and he will go out and he will be hacking. As he says, I was hacking at it, a big sea came over the bow. Somehow Stoddard held on to the stanchions and he was able to finish the job. Then once the ships have been parted, Bankhead will drop his anchor so he can have some type of stability. The problem with that is that's another place for water to come into the Monitor. Now, most ships have lifeboats, and the Monitor had a ship's cutter and another smaller boat. There are some people say they had collapsible boats inside, but actually, the Monitor's cutter, other small boat, and these rescue boats were stored on the Rhode Island because they didn't want to see them washed away as the ship went south. Oh my gosh, these people have no way to get off the boat. I got to tell you, I mean, they are struggling. The hand pumps are still being worked. Butts says he's at the hand bucket, but while he is up in the turret, doing the hand bucket routine, I will tell you, the ship's cat is wailing and howling. And so Butts can't stand it because you got the wind shrieking, the storm, the waves beating on the ship. And so he grabs the cat, throws it into one of the Dahlgrens, 11-inch Dahlgrens, and closes the tampion. Now, this is a great story, but I have to tell you, when we cleaned out the bores of the cannon, we never found the cat. So we don't know if Butts is telling the truth or not, but nevertheless, he actually said after he stuffed the cat in there that you could still hear the echo of the cat's cries. Oh my gosh, telltale heart, right? So mountain of waters were rushing over our decks, foaming along our sides. The small boats all of a sudden were heading from the Rhode Island to the Monitor, and they were pitching like mere playthings in the water. You see, Trenchard's ship has a steel hull, and he doesn't want to come close to the Monitor or too close to the Monitor, because if he does so, he could, with a wave, fall on top of the Monitor, right? Or he could crash over the Monitor, or the Monitor could be pushed into the side of the Rhode Island, making both ships sink, and all would be a loss. So what will happen is that these two cutters will be sent from the Rhode Island to the Monitor. And I want to tell you, they kept firing blue flares to light up the scenes so people can see each other. The howling of the tempest drove people crazy. However, when those cutters came alongside, now you had to get in. Now you couldn't, I got to tell you, you couldn't bring those wooden cutters right next to the side of the Monitor. In fact, you had to keep it an oar's length from the Monitor, because they didn't want the Monitor to smack in to one of those cutters. It was terrible. And so what did you have to do to get off? You had to make a big jump into the lifeboat. Some people missed, like Daniel Moore, and all you heard was the bubbling cry of some strong swimmer in his agony, according to William Keeler. George Gear said Daniel Moore was his best friend, and as he jumped both at the same time, Moore missed, Gear made it into the boat. Many of them were unable to make that jump. They were afraid. So, like Keeler is standing on the deck getting ready to go into a lifeboat when all of a sudden a wave comes, picks him up, throws him into the sea. Then another wave throws him back onto the deck. Then he jumps in towards the lifeboat. He misses the lifeboat, but Grenville Weeks will throw him a line and save him. Several other officers will actually miss the big jump, and nevertheless, many of these people are going to be saved thanks to actions of the crew members of the cutter, and the men that make it into the boat will in turn help each other. And that's the case of Samuel Green. Samuel Green misses. He's pulled into the boat, and then he in turn pulls someone else into the boat. So then once they fill up, Bankhead is, shouting, let's get in that boat. So once they get filled up, now remember, the Monitor has a crew of 63 members. So getting into these cutters, they're overloaded. They are leaking. The wind is howling. And so then they have to row back to the Rhode Island. And to get to the road, now, let me just tell you, to get off the Monitor, not only did you have to make the jump, but the ladder had been washed away. And so they had these ropes. You had to come down to then get on the deck with the sea foaming around you and then make the big jump. Then when you got next to the Rhode Island, they dropped rope ladders and rope so that the crew members could go up on the side of the Rhode Island for safety. Keeler says he gets there, and when he makes it up, he is half naked, but with the warmth of the crew of the Rhode Island, he felt that not only had he survived, but he had reached a form of heaven. Oh my gosh. Grenville Weeks, when the boat gets next, tries to bump into the Rhode Island. It cracks one of the boats. Grenville Weeks puts his arm out, and of course, his arm is going to be dislocated. 3 fingers have to be amputated once he gets back on the boat. He's a right-handed surgeon. So someone says, oh my gosh, you lost the use of your hand. And afterwards, and Weeks says, look, a hand and an arm is worth a life. Wow. So, everyone's given food and blankets when they get on. However, the rope that hits the side will eventually not only crack, but it will sink. So now the Rhode Island has one, but everyone gets off it. Now the Rhode Island, one cutter, commanded by acting master mate Rodney Brown, will turn around and head back to the Monitor. Now, just let me tell you, the storm is getting worse and worse. The cutter gets back to the Monitor. Actually, John Pine Bankhead reaches out and holds the painter, or the stem of the rear of the vessel, stern of the vessel, and so that people can get back on. However, there were several that were up in the turret, and they were either too afraid or confused to try and get off, or they thought the boat was overloaded. Many reasons, we don't know exactly what their reasons were. I have to say, George Ferguson goes up to the quartermaster, Peter Williams, and he gives him his gold watch and says, you will need this more than I, implying he wasn't going to survive, and he didn't. So we know that Bankhead shouts to these people on the deck to get off. They don't. Now, I got to tell you, actually, Frank Butts had gone down through the boat, and there's one officer that was in his bunk so seasick that he refused to get out of his bunk. He merely said, look, I'm going to die here anyway, so leave me alone. They leave him there. And So Rodney Brown takes his cutter back to the Rhode Island, uh, and then turns around again to head back towards the Monitor. He's using that red lantern as a guide to get back there. He says the Monitor is there. He goes up in top of a wave, and then when he came back right where the Monitor had once was, there was nothing but eddies. As Frank Butts will say, when I stood on the forecastle of the Rhode Island, watching the red and white lights that hung from the pendant staff above the turret, which now and then was seen as we would perhaps both rise on the sea together, until at last, just as the moon has passed below the horizon, they were lost, and the Monitor was no more. Well, these men are going to be actually taken back to Hampton Roads. And well, they first go to Beaufort, rest, go back to Hampton Roads, and actually telegrams are sent to many people's wives and friends. And Keeler writes his wife before he writes her this long, beautiful letter. The Telegraph have promptly informed you that before this loss of the Monitor and also of my safety, my escape was a very narrow one. I have been through a night of horrors that would have appalled the stoutest heart. Well, I have to say that it was shocking that the Monitor had lost. It sank about 12:30 on the early morning of December 31st. That little ship that had saved the nation on March 9th, 1862, was lost forever. Actually, when the crew finally makes it back to Gosport Navy Yard in Portsmouth, Virginia, they begin receiving letters from people saying, hey, what happened to my loved one? Because 16 people go down with the Monitor. Now, we can count several that are just washed off the deck. And so we think between 7 and 8 are actually on the Monitor when it sank. In fact, 2 bodies were found in the turret, and one of them could be a man known as Jacob Nicholas. We can't make sure who these people are, but William Jacob Nicholas's sister writes John Pine Bankhead. Now, Bankhead is overwhelmed. He's unwell. He's trying to answer these letters, but instead, Grenville Weeks takes the job of doing so. And he writes Jacob Nicholas's sister and says, I am too unwell to dictate more than a short and sad answer to your note. Your brother went down with other brave souls, and only a good providence prevented my accompanying him. You have my warm sympathies and the assurance that your brother died doing his duty well, and uh, and has, I believe, gone to a brighter world when storms do not come. Oh my gosh. Well, the Monitor, of course, was a bad design. When you think about an 18-inch freeboard, the overhang, and they all say it's going to fall apart before it sinks. And that's just because Erickson had a rush job of getting the Monitor. He, had to complete the ship in 100 days. So it had certain flaws, which he tried to replicate or resolve in what is known as the Passaic class, which was the next group of monitors. In fact, the Passaic was in the same storm. The state of Georgia said, oh, we need to, the commander of the state of Georgia said, oh, we got to go in and, we can't take the storm. And Roger says, we're riding it out fine. He cuts the hawse lines, and somehow the Passaic survives the storm itself and makes it to Beaufort, North Carolina. They never truly solved some of the inherent problems with the Monitor design. It was really a concept for harbor defense, or to be towed into action in more shallow waters. Sadly, it was not really designed to go to sea. Sammy Dana Green survived two almost sinkings going from New York to Hampton Roads. In fact, when they made it into Hampton Roads, Green merely comments, "I felt like I had lived 10 years." And that is the trip from March 6th to the late afternoon of March 8th. So in 2 days, it was so harrowing that he felt he had aged so much. The Monitor, however, lives throughout all our memory, and I have to tell you that thanks to NOAA, the U.S. Navy, Dive Team 6, and the Mariners Museum donors, we were able to raise part of the Monitor, including the turret, its guns, the engine, and so many other important artifacts that are now at the Mariners Museum. The raising of the turret was unbelievable. NASA and the shipyard had to design this special spider, which we have at the museum, to go down and hook under the turret so it could be raised up. Okay, you just think of all this weight. The turret alone weighed 121 tons. It was filled with concretion. Then you got to add the the weight of the Dahlgren's guns that came in at 16,000 pounds apiece. So it was almost another miracle that we were able to raise it and then take it to the Mariners Museum, where you can see it today. And on certain opportunities, the turret, we have to drain the tank so that we do special work inside the turret. And you can actually, if you're able to go in, I used to give tours of it, but COVID has denied that sort of stuff today. But you could touch where some of the shot hit the dent the side of the Monitor, including a 7-inch Brook bolt that screwed into the bottom of the turret, trying to jam it. And it screws in about 3 to 4 inches at a range of 300 yards. So yes, the Monitor was shot-proof. However, it also had only 2 guns, so it had a very low rate of fire. When the Passaic class had 15-inch guns, it took 10 minutes to reload those 15-inch guns. But the whole story of the Battle of the Ironclads, Battle of Hampton Roads, recognizes that technology was one of the technological changes, one of the key aspects of the American Civil War. The Virginia was an ersatz creation of materials at hand, whereas the Monitor was a completely new design. But it are those industries that are developed during the Civil War and expanded during the Civil War that are going to give America, or United States, a leading edge in the latter part of the 19th century as it rises to become one of the leading industrial nations of the world. The Monitor signifies that. Neither the Virginia nor the Monitor will survive 1862, but their legacy is seen today in warships of today. And the memory of that battle is one of the 10 greatest naval battles in world history. And as a result of that, we marvel at the bravery of the crew. In fact, one crew member, William Dirt, says it was not surviving in the turret when it was under fire. It was all about surviving the sinking, or the bad unseaworthiness of the Monitor. So, without further ado, I want to thank you very much for being part of this program today. I think I went a little over, but that's just me. You can send questions to Mike or directly to me. My email is John Quarstein, that's JohnQuarstein, all lowercase, at gmail.com. You can also get copies of my book, The Monitor Boys, which tells even more about the sinking than I have today, and by going to the Mariners Museum website and going to the gift shop. And I just went to the museum to sign a whole bunch of books because many people are ordering them. I can even note this book is for you. So anyway, I want to thank you for today. And I just want to tell you the adage that many people shared during the war, especially these older officers, that you should always sink before surrender. Thank you all.